idle. So as Bridget said, I started off with the Aran yarn. It is such a beautiful, soft and cuddly yarn. And with my little samples of wool, I knitted up a little log cabin square. And then when Bridget had her sale 2 weeks ago, I think it is, I bought myself, I'm just going to move my camera. Oh, how do I do this? Oh, am I still there? There we are. Okay, I'm just going to move my camera and you can see I bought myself some beautiful yarns from the sale that Bridget had last week. So what we're going to start off with is looking at some of the things I've done with that yarn, and I've knitted out some squares in the log cabin pattern. So I've just knitted a few of them, and I really love the way this is turning out. So when I start a project, the very first thing I do is I knit a swatch, whether it's my own pattern that I'm creating or whether it's a pattern that I've bought and I'm following someone else's pattern. I always knit a swatch to see how it's going to work. First of all, to check my tension, obviously, how many rows and how many stitches I need will make up a 10 centimeter square. But not only that, is to check the drape. So this one I did in a 5mm needle. And it's got a very nice feel and it's really nice and soft. But then I decided to knit in a 5.5mm needle. And can you just see the drape of that yarn with a 5.5? It's going to be so nice and cozy. So I've decided to knit all of these in the 5.5mm needle. And I'm going to show you how I started. So the very first thing I did was I did a provisional cast on. I don't know if any of you have ever tried a provisional cast on, but I have the simplest, easiest method out. So I start off with my slip knot and a crochet hook. And I'm just going to chain a few stitches. The center block of the log cabin is 15 stitches. So I've just cast on 15 stitches. So with my chain, I'm going to chain about 20. And I don't care how neat or untidy it is. It really doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep going for a little bit to get my 20 stitches. And I've heard most of you are crocheters, so you do know how to do a chain. When I've done...
Jane, sorry, could you just clarify? I thought that you said your middle block was 15 stitches, and then you just said now that you were doing 20?
Yes. So I'm doing more than I need, and I'll show you why when we get there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, so I'm just doing 20. My last stitch, I just pull it all the way through and tighten it off, and then that end gets a little knot. And I'll show you why in a little while. So if you look at the chain, on this side, I've got a whole lot of little V's. Can you see that? If I turn my
sorry, Jane, would you bring it a little closer to the camera? Because it's quite difficult to see these.
Okay. Can you see all the little V's? If I turn it over, I've got a whole lot of little straight lines, almost as if they dashed. And those are the lines that I'm wanting. So I pick up my needles and I don't worry about starting with a knot. I just want to have a bit of a tail. And when you have a crochet chain, the beginnings and the ends are not always easy to see. So, or the dashed lines at the beginning and the ends, should I say, are not always easy to see, which is why you chain more than you're going to need. So have I answered your question? So now what I'm going to do is I put my needle through one of those dashed lines. Okay, so there are the V's, and I turn it over, and there's the little dashes. I put my needle through one of those dashed lines, and I hook my yarn over and pull it through. And there's my first stitch. I pick up the next dashed line, and if you miss a dash, it also doesn't matter. So I'm just trying to keep my work centered so that you can see what I'm doing. And I keep going through until I've picked up 15 stitches. Can you all see what I'm doing? And if my work turns, I can always see when it's turned the wrong way because I've got the V's and not the dashes. So I just turn it over and find the next dash.
Jane, a question for you about the twisting and turning of the crochet chain. What would happen if the chain twisted and you picked up the V on one stitch instead of the bar on the back?
You'll end up needing to cut this thread when you end up picking up the stitches at the end. It's not a huge issue because usually your piece that you chain is a piece of scrap yarn. So if you end up cutting it, that doesn't matter. But it's preferable not to have to cut it because it pulls undone so easily. So it's really, really simple.
Okay, so it's just, it's not the end of the world if it does twist for the first time, for example. It's just going to make it easier when you come to pulling out the holding thread when you want the live stitches at the end.
Yes, okay. And it also doesn't matter if it twists and twists again and you pick up a dashed line from the twist because it still comes undone. It also doesn't matter if you miss a dash because then that chain will just come undone when you get there. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. I've just got 4 more to go.
So the most important thing is just to make sure you're picking up from the bars at the back, not picking up from these. It just don't worry about the twisting and things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think I've got 15 stitches now, or maybe I've got 16. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. There we are. I've got my 15 stitches. So I can now start to knit and knit up my block. So my first row will be a purl row because actually my first row was that pickup row. So then I would just purl that. And for the center block, all you're going to do is stocking stitch for 19 rows. And it's just a purl. When you've got to the end of your 19 rows and your first stitch, this is very loose. So when I knit it, I then pull that nice and tight. And then I can carry on going. And can you see I've got all my V's now on the front of the work? And on the back, there's all the dashes. And there's your provisional cast on. And I'll show you in a little while how we undo that. And don't forget the little knot on the end of your thread. That's quite important when we come to undoing it. So what I've done is a few samples so that I can show you what to do. So here I've knitted my center block, and you can either use a double pointed needle, or you can use society sticks. And I don't have, all my double pointed needles are tiny, so with my stitches this big, being 5.5 millimeter needle, my DPNs just fall off. So the society stick works quite nicely, but just to ensure it doesn't slip off, I use a clover clip. I don't know if you've seen these clips. It is a thing that I use in quilting as well. You could also use a peg, and I clip it on, so then my society stick is not going to move on my work. You can also use rubber bands. Put a rubber band on either end and it's not going to move. So now what I'm going to do is we need to do the second log. So here I've got my first center block, and I need to do my first log, sorry. So I need my needles again, and I'm going to use a light yarn so that you can see what I'm doing.
So Jane, a quick question before you go into this next piece. Can you just show us on your sample swatch that you've knitted there, the way you're going to work is you're always knitting only the stitches that you've got. You never have to kind of cast on and create extra stitches, because the second block is always going to make the right number of stitches to knit the third one.
So what we're going to do is, here I've knitted the first block, but I then pick up stitches down the side. So you don't need to cast on any stitches, and the only time you cast off is right at the end. But you pick up stitches down the side. So one of the things that I do when I knit is I always slip my first stitch. And can you see that it's given me a really nice edge? When I slip it, it gives me a neat edge to work with. And that's where I pick up my stitches. And it's really easy because I only pick up the number of stitches as loops that I have.
Sorry, Jane, another clarifying question there. Do you slip the first stitch on every knit row? What do you do on the rows?
So on the knit row, I slip the first stitch knitwise.
Okay.
So that gives me that look. On the purl row, I slip the row purlwise, and it gives me that.
Nice.
So every single row is slipped.
So you've got that same edge on both sides of the work, and slipping in whatever stitch you are working. So slip it knitwise if you're knitting, slip it purlwise if you're purling.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so pleasure. So now what we're going to do is, it doesn't matter which side of your knitting you're going to pick up your stitches, but I've just turned my work clockwise, and now I'm going to knit it down the left-hand side of the block. And it does pull in, as you can see here. So I do try and create an extra stitch by going in behind that last stitch on my needle. Can you see there? Going in on the last stitch, and I'm just looping the thread over. I've got no knots or anything else. And here is where the slipped stitch at the beginning of the row is such a pleasure. You can see I've got that slipped stitch, which creates an easy way of picking up that stitch. And always pick up the two loops of the first stitch, not just one. If you pick up one, can you see a hole develops? And you don't want that. So by picking up two, you don't get that hole. And I'm going to start weaving in my thread. As much as I enjoy sewing, I do not enjoy sewing up knitting things. And I can't stand it when I've finished a project and there are 1,000,001 threads to knit away or sew away. So as you can see on the back of the work, all my threads have been woven in as I go, and all I need to do is trim them off. So how I do that weaving is I put my needle through the loop, and I've got that tail of the color I'm using in my left hand, and I hold it over the top of my needle and I knit the stitch, and I drop that tail down to the bottom. My next stitch, again through 2 of those loops, and I'm weaving, so I'm not wanting my tail anywhere near my work right now, and I knit the stitch. The next stitch through 2, and I bring the tail over the top of my needle and knit. I want my tail out of the way, so I hold it below my work, pick up the 2 loops of the stitch and knit it. And for the last time, I only do 3 stitches. Wool felts, so you don't need to do more than 3 stitches of weaving, because it's never going to come undone. I'm sure you all know how difficult it's been to undo work once you've knitted it, and that's because the wool has started to felt. So there's my last stitch, and I'll now drop my tail to the back, and I don't need it. And I'm going to carry on picking up stitches. So with the first log, I end up picking up 10 stitches down the length of the side of the block and into the last stitch. There should be 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And there's my first row of my first log of the log cabin blanket. I would then turn it over and purl this row, slipping the first stitch purlwise, and then carry on purling. And you can see the society stick stays between my thumb and my first finger, and it doesn't get in the way of my knitting. It just stays out of the way, which is really easy to work with. And the next row, I would just turn it and slip my first stitch knitwise and knit that row. And the logs each are done with 8 rows. So I would just need to knit 8 rows to get this log finished. Are there any questions so far?
No questions in the chat, Jane, but I had just had one question. You went quite quickly on the purl side, and so I was paying attention on the knit side. Where do you hold the yarn when you slip the first stitch? If you're knitting, the yarn's at the back as if to knit.
Yeah, and so when you're purling, the yarn is in the front. So I keep the yarn in the front of my right-hand needle, and I slip it purlwise, and then the yarn is still in the front for me to carry on purling.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so I will just get to the end of this row. It's not going to take long. And what I've done is the next step I've finished up, so that you can now see what I do with the provisional cast on. So here I've done, my first log is finished, and I need to pick up the stitches from the provisional cast on. And this is where that knot is important. So I've got to undo from the knot, and I just snip that off. And I'm going to pick up these stitches and put them onto my needle. And I'm undoing it. And can you see, it's a chain. So it's just going to undo. And I pick up my first stitch. Can you see what I'm doing? And I undo it. Pick up the next stitch and undo it. So if you had accidentally picked up the a V loop instead of the dash at the back, then this is where you would just need to cut your thread, pick up your stitch, and then carry on going with undoing it. Have you ever seen such an easy provisional cast on?
You make it look very easy, Jane. I'm not sure it would look quite so easy if I was doing it.
It really is. It really is easy. The first time I saw it, I picked it up so quickly because it's just about picking up the dash. Whoops, I've dropped a stitch. There we are, I've got it back. And I'm at my last stitch. And I'm going to put it on the needle. And I think actually I picked up a V there. Can you see? Because it's not coming through nicely, but it's my last stitch, so I just pull it out. And there's my scrap yarn done, and I have my stitches on my needle, and I'm ready to knit. But now what we need is we need to pick up stitches from the bottom of the first, at least from the side of the first log, and then the stitches across there. So I'm going to take another color yarn. I love having all these yarns in front of me. So what color next? So again, I want to pick up as many stitches as I can so it doesn't pull in too much. And so again, I'm going to go behind the first stitch that is on the needle. And I'm going to knit that and into the first slip stitch, and I'm weaving as I go. Whoops, I've already woven that over the top, so this time the thread stays below. The next stitch, the thread comes over the top, and I knit it. And then I've just knit across those first stitches that I knitted, and I only need to do one more in the blue, weaving it over. And I carry on going to the end of the row. And then I have my second log. So always with this log cabin, the first set where you pick up the stitches from the previous log, you're going to pick up 4 stitches. And again, I've now got a loose stitch, and I just pull it tight and carry on going. When I do my next log, that's when I'll weave that through. Are there any questions before I go on to the next step?
No, nothing in the chat at the moment. I don't know, how's everybody doing? Anyone want anything clarified? I think Jane's doing a great job. Every time I have a question in my mind, then I see she goes and explains it, like the one with the little the cold tail. I was just thinking, now I wonder, when do you weave that one in? And then you said, no, you're going to weave that in the next time around.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first center block. Sorry, I didn't note how many rows you did there.
19.
19. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what I've done so far here is I've done my first log, picked up 4, picked up the 15 stitches across the bottom of the block, and I've knitted my 8 rows.
Sorry, Jane, could you say that again and just go slowly, because my brain's going a little slower than...
Okay, so I knitted my first block, I picked up my 10 stitches down the side and knitted my first log. When I had done that, I didn't cast off or anything else. I've just left the thread hanging because I'm going to weave that in later. I don't want to lose any stitches. So when I did the second log, I started off by threading my needle through and undoing the provisional cast on and joining my new yarn, picking up 4 stitches, 15 stitches across the center block, and I knitted my 8 rows. put in my society stick and held it in place. When I did my third log, I did exactly the same as with the second log. I picked up my 4 stitches, picked up my 10 stitches, the same as I had done on this side, and knitted my 8 rows. So now we go back to the very beginning, and I've got my last of the first round of logs to do. And when I put my society stick on, I put it so the point is ready to knit. So I don't have to rethread those stitches onto a needle. It's essentially on a needle. And what I do is, same as before, what color shall I use? Same as before, I'm going to pick up 4 stitches at the beginning of the first log. And weave the tail of that color through. And now I come to the next color. I'm going to just move that out of the way. And I come to the next color, and I've only woven this thread over twice, and I'm ready with my next color, which also has a tail. And I just pull that tail a little tight from the, I'm pulling the green tail a little tight because this stitch is quite loose. So I'm going to knit this stitch, and I want my green woven in, so I'm going to skip with my orange and weave the green in. I'm going to knit, at least weave once more with the orange, and then I can drop it. I don't need to do it. Don't need to worry about it anymore. Green over the top, and that's my second one with the green, and my third one with the green. And then I can drop it. And I can carry on knitting to the end of the row and to the other side of the first log. If I'm not centering my work properly, please say so. I'm watching my hands, not the camera.
No, I think so.
And okay, so I've got all the stitches off my society stick with some splinters in my work. That does happen. And I've got the opposite end of the log to pick up. This time I pick up 5. So it's 1. And can you see it? I've got a really nice, easy little hole so that I know exactly where to pick up. And that's because the stitch is slipped. That first stitch is slipped. And same as at the beginning, where I go to the back of that first stitch on the next needle and I knit it. And now I'm ready to knit my 4th log. I would just turn it over. And slip my first stitch and purl. And the way that I've done this log, this 4th log, is what I keep doing all the way around until I've done 3 logs from the center block. So here I've got my center block, 1, 2, 3, my center block, 1, 2, 3, center block, 1, 2, 3, center block, 1, 2, 3. So I end up going around it 12 times. This block, the way I've designed it, it ends up being 30 centimeters square, and with 10 balls of yarn, I'll be able to make a blanket that's approximately 1.2 by 1.5 centimeters square. And obviously, I am being a quilter, I do like to add a border. So what I thought is when it's finished, I'm going to, and I've sewn it all together, I'm going to add a ribbed border all the way around. And that's all there is to it.
You make it sound very easy, Jane.
It is very easy. So what I will do is I will write up the pattern, and then if anyone wants to, I'll send it to you, Bridget.
Yeah.
And you can have it available as a download or as a pattern to go with a kit of yarns, however you like.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, Jane. Thank you. Maybe what we can do is create a blog post together where we can include your pattern and some of the sort of overview of the instructions and things, and link in the video recording of this session.
Okay. Yes, we can chat about that.
Perfect. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to, does anyone want to talk to Jane about some of what's going on? Because please just feel free to either stick your hand up or just unmute yourself and have a little chat.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, when you're picking up stitches at the end of a log, is it 4 stitches or 5 stitches along each side?
So it's 4 at the beginning,
okay,
and 5 at the end.
Okay, awesome. Cool, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool.
Are there any other questions?
So I've just got a quick question. You obviously can use any type of wool and any size needles depending on what you're wanting to make. But would you suggest that once you start with a particular wool, say if it's double knitting or whether it's chunky or whatever, that you actually, when you change colors, that you stick to the same type of wool? Because otherwise, if you're mixing up the wools, like a very thick wool with a very thin wool, it might just make your logs go a little bit haywire.
Yes, it will. If you're not using, if you're mixing yarn, then when you pick up stitches with a thick yarn and you pick up that same number of stitches with a thin yarn, you're going to get a much smaller log or even center block, and it's going to distort your knitting quite seriously. So you don't necessarily need to stick with one brand, but I do recommend sticking with one weight of yarn.
Jane,
does that answer your question?
Sorry. Yes, I see a thumbs up from Vicky. I think that worked. So Jane, there's a question in the chat from Liana asking, after the 3rd round, do you cast off each log?
Yes. So here, so this is my first, or the first last log. Does that make sense? Of this round. So here's 1, 2, 3. So 8 rows leaves you with your yarn finished on the purl side. So I cast off knitwise, and that brings me to here to then pick up my stitches across here, knit my 8 rows, cast off, pick up my stitches, knit my 8 rows, cast off, and then pick up all the way across, knit my 8 rows, and on the 9th row cast off knitwise, and then your block is finished.
Perfect, thanks.
Did they? Great.
Those blocks look amazing, Jane.
I'm loving them. I've been as I finish one, I block it, and then it's ready to see, because obviously when you knit something, it all curls up, and I like to see what I've done. So I block it, and I can check and have a look and be carrying on knitting my next block.
Fantastic. And are you using a particular system for how you're choosing the colors, or are you just kind of going with the flow and doing whatever you feel like?
So I more or less go with whatever I feel like, except I've got 10 colors. If I turn this a bit, you can, and I put all my yarns together. Can you see my little pile of yarns? I've got 10 colors. So all 10 colors get used in the block every time, but I want to be able to use only the 10 to make 20 squares. So if on every block my final row were the same colors, I wouldn't have enough. So what I do and do make sure of is that, first of all, my center block, I will only have 2 center blocks in each of the colors. And for the final round, I will only use that color twice through my blocks in the final round. And that way, my 10 colors will make up 20 blocks.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah, I think so. So you do have a little bit of a system because you're aware that you want to use all of the yarn and not need any more. And so you're making sure that you balance how much goes into each section.
Yes, because a square, when it's finished, weighs 50 grams.
Okay.
How do you do the blocking?
So the blocking is, I take my piece of knitting and I wet it completely so that it's sodden, and then I'll put it in a towel, put it flat in a towel, and I will pretend that my other block is a towel. I'll roll the block into the towel and then stand on it to get all the water out again, unroll it, and then my block is now still wet, and I've got my design wall for quilting is a polystyrene board, but you can also use those kids' mats that like a puzzle. And I put it out. I've got 29 centimeters. It's actually 29 centimeters. My blocks work out to be, not quite 30. Though I could stretch them to 30, but I don't want too much of a stretch because this is going to end up stretching a bit. So I've got 29 centimeters square marked out on my design wall, and then I pin one side across the top, down the bottom, and then I take the bottom corner down to the 29 centimeter point, and then I'll pull my side straight and pin it, and my bottom straight and pin it, and then leave it to dry. And when it's dried, this is how it looks, all nice and flat.
Great.
And I do that with all my knitting. If I'm knitting a shawl, then I'll also, when I finished it, I'll wet it. And if I've taken it all over the place with me, then I actually wash it. And then I'll put it out on my design wall and pin it. And if I've done lace work where you've got these scallops, then I'll pull each of the scallops with a pin and leave it to dry. And then when it's dried, you get the effect of the lace. And when I've done a jersey, then the jersey I put on a coat hanger and then pin the coat hanger onto the board with the jersey and pull out the sleeves, but I don't stretch a garment. When I've made a garment, I don't stretch that, but I will stretch things like this and scarves. Yeah. And my socks I don't block. I don't worry about those.
Great.
I've just got a quick question.
Sorry.
So what would the point be? I mean, why would one wet it? Is it so that it sort of hangs better, or I'm not sure.
So when I don't know if you're going to be able to see at this angle. at this stage where when you're still working on your project, the stitches are still quite defined, and they will come undone if you undo it, if you choose to undo it for any reason. And here you can see I've got almost funny stitches from where I've picked up. When you wash it and you've stretched it, then all those stitches and the work, it tends to blend in. Can you see how, I don't think you're going to be able to see it too clearly. Here, I don't know if you can see, there's also a step. Whereas on this side, there's not such a step. It flattens everything and blends it in really nicely. And when you're doing cable knitting and you block it, then the cables, they tend to pop up more. Have I answered your question?
Any other questions?
Hi, Bridget. I have a question. It's a what if. I just wanted to ask, are you intending to put a backing on the blanket when you're done? Because when you look at the ends, if it gets caught?
The ends here, you can see, here I'll snip this a bit shorter. And what ends up happening, can you see here, it forms like a little ball and you end up not seeing it. And here there's a tail, you're not going to see it. And I don't worry about those little bits at the end. So no, my intention isn't to put a backing on it. It's to leave it as it is.
Thank you, Kathy.
Any other questions?
Hi, Jane. It's
Yeah.
Kelly. What would be the minimum amount of colours you could use in a square? And if you were to do the 10 completed squares, what would your quantity of yarn work out to?
So if you, for each block, the size that I've done with a number of stitches weighs 50 grams. So if you're only going to do 10 blocks, then you need 500 grams of yarn. The minimum number would be, I would say 8, because you don't want to repeat colors next to one another.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Looks lovely.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello, it's Maria. Thank you, Jane. Such a
Pleasure.
beautiful lesson. I've learned so much.
Good.
I'm wondering about caring for the blanket after, or whatever you're making, I suppose, after
Yes.
all the parts are joined. Are you using the same sort of weaving technique when you join the squares?
So when I join the squares, I'm going to do what's called a mattress stitch. Have you heard of a mattress stitch?
No, it's news to me. I might be.
Okay. Are there others who need to know how to use a mattress, how to do a mattress stitch? Sorry, I'm just looking for a needle, and then I can show you.
Yes, we're getting a yes, please show us.
Okay, so I'm going to use a color that's going to show up. And I'm using actually, let me just see if I can find, I need a tapestry needle. I hadn't expected to get this far, but maybe this will work. This will work rather than a bodkin pin. I thread my needle with the length of yarn, and I'm going to just show you over this section. I'm not going to worry about the edges. What I'm going to do is the way Mattress Stitch works. I also do this when I've knitted a garment and I'm going over the sleeves. So I'm picking up a stitch so that I've got the point of the V on my needle. Can you see that? Do I need to come closer? Can you see I've got the point of the needle, at least the point of the V under my needle?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay. And I pull that through. I'll then match it to a V on the other side and pull that. And a V on the next one. And what I'm ending up doing is creating a stitch. Can you see how that looks? Can you see that?
Yes.
Do I need to hold it closer?
I think it would be helpful to hold it closer.
Okay, let me just do a couple more and then you can see. So each time I'm picking up the stitch so that the point of the V of the stitch ends up being on my needle. Can you see?
Yes, so you've created almost a little row of V's with
another row of stitches, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I would pick up there. And when you do this over a shoulder of a garment, and I then use steam, and but not too hot an iron, but with steam, and I iron it. And you can then not see where the seam of your shoulder is. It looks like the garment flows over the top of your shoulder.
Okay, so you're almost creating another row of knitting,
yes,
with knit stitch looking stitches that are going to hide those two cast off edges at the back.
Yes. And the
so
further I go, the more you can see.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes, that looks good. So a question for you with a blanket like this, I don't know if you've thought that far yet, but are you going to create that mattress stitch join in a color that is the same color throughout the whole blanket so that you'll see it? It becomes a design feature?
No, I have thought about that. And what I would rather do is I like to have my seams hidden. So if I'm going to join these two blocks, I've got more green than any other color. So I would go green all the way to the far end.
Okay. So with each block you join, you'll use the same color as your last log, because that log will go the whole way across the block.
Yes, yes.
And it'll look like it's just an extra row of stitching of that this block. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jane, can I ask you, do you not pull that orange yarn now to make those stitches disappear?
No, because if I pull it, yes, it does hide the work, but can you see how everything is pulled in?
When I've seen before, that's what it's told me to do, and that's where I'm obviously going wrong, because it hides the stitches, but it's not very neat.
No, and also what it does is this has no give whatsoever. It's as tight and stiff as anything. So the elasticity that you had from the stitches is gone. And at the back, you end up with this ridge. Whereas if you don't pull it, you don't get that ridge.
Gosh, well, thanks for showing that. That's made my life a lot easier with something I'm busy trying to sew together with Mattress Stitch. And I'm not enjoying a minute of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it makes it so much nicer when you do this. When the stitches show.
Thanks, Jane.
Pleasure. Are there any other questions? So I just wanted to show you the back where the stitches are not pulled, and you can see the stitches. Can you see it's flat? There's no ridge because you haven't pulled it tight. So it feels really nice as well. Any other questions? Everyone's gone quiet.
Everyone's gone very quiet. Is there anything else anyone wants to ask about this project or any of the details that Jane's talked about?
I'm just wondering, sorry, it's Maria again. If you're going to end off the design with a border to go all round.
Yes, I am. I'm going to, so when I've got, obviously I won't also choose 2 blocks to go next to one another where the color's the same. So I would rather choose blocks where everything's different. But what I'll do is, because I'm a quilter, I do like borders on my work, and I'll do a border of a rib. I'll do a rib stitch all the way around.
Oh, that was my next question, whether it would be crocheted or knitted. Okay, so
knitted. Knitted. My crochet is appalling.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is so beautiful.
Thanks.
So on that blanket where you've got the 10 colors, you're going to have 10 squares.
Yes.
So how does that go? Because it's obviously, is it 3 across and so many down, or how does it actually work across?
So I've got my, let me pull out this one, which I haven't done any work on. So here I've got my block with my 10 different colors, but some of the colors are used twice.
Yes.
Because there's actually 13 colors in the block.
Okay.
Because I've got my central block, so that's 1.
Yes.
And then I do 4 logs 3 times.
So how many squares are you doing with the 10 ball that you've got?
I'm going to do 20 squares.
20 squares. Okay, so it's 4 by 5 then, across.
Yes, yeah. So my blanket is going to end up measuring 1.2 meters by 1.5 meters.
Okay, great, thanks.
Jane, you're obviously a very experienced knitter, so time indication is not necessarily appropriate for everyone, but can you give us an idea of how long does it take you to make one square? One full completed block?
So I sit in the evening and knit, and after supper I sit and knit, and I'm in bed by 9:30, so maybe 2 hours to do a block.
Wow, okay, that's very quick. So for us mere mortal knitters, it might take 3 to 4 hours.
Possibly, yeah, but it's still possible to do one in an evening.
Okay, that's great. So it's with 20 squares, it's a manageable project that you could keep working at and finish in a reasonable time frame.
Absolutely. The border might take a little longer to do, doing it in a rib, but it also then depends on how much of a rib you want to knit to finish it off.
Yeah.
Sorry, would that border be worked as a log as well?
No, I'm going to do it in a rib stitch, knit one, purl one.
Yes, but are you knitting the one side first and then the other, as if you would do a log?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Just to carry on, because the whole theme is my log cabin, so I'll finish it off with a log cabin look as well. So what I'll do is, when I've finished my whole blanket, I'll take photos of it and give them to Bridget to be able to post.
Fantastic. That's so exciting. Okay. And you're knitting it really fast, so it's going to be in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. I'm going to need to order another ball of yarn to do my rib, though.
Yes.
So my 10 balls.
Probably more than one.
Yeah, I might need 2.
Yeah.
But so my 10 balls will get used up in all my blocks.
Yes. And you'll need
and that's it.
Border.
And I'll need a border. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm seeing lots of questions, well, comments and things about the project and the pattern and things. And what we'll definitely do is work with Jane to put a blog post together that includes the pattern, and we can link in the video and just explain to people how they would be able to do it, or put a kit together or something as well.
Okay, great.
Fantastic.
Just one. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Margaret.
You can call it your lockdown blanket.
Yes, I could. Yeah.
I've just got a question. Is it, what would it look like if you use the same color throughout? I mean, if you just bought like however many balls of wool and you just did the same thing, I mean, would that, what does that look like?
It would just be plain. The point of all the colors is to get the definition of all the logs.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So if you wanted to knit it plain, then you would just need to cast on what's it? Probably 40 times 4, 160 stitches, and knit until your yarn is finished.
So Vicky, in asking that question, when Jane was talking about the colors, I think there are all sorts of different ways that you could think about color with something like this. So my mind is buzzing, and I want to get my pencil crayons out and sort of just play with a few ideas of how you could simplify the colors, for example, and maybe do it with a smaller set of colors that repeat more often within the square. Yeah, I think there are a lot of different variations that you could do.
Yes, there are. So what I'm going to do is when I send the pattern for Bridget, for you to put out, I will include a little block which can be colored in.
Amazing. That would be fantastic.
And then it'll be easy for people to take their pencil crayons out and color in. What looks really nice is on a traditional log cabin, on a quilted log cabin, I'd need to sit back a bit. The one side of the log cabin all the way through is in light colors, and then the other colors are dark colors all the way through. So I haven't done it that way. I've rather just done a mishmash of color because I absolutely love color. But you can play with, say, a light blue on one side and a dark blue on another, and a pale orange and a terracotta as opposites, and play with colors like that so that you get a different look to the log cabin. It also then gives it a different dimension. So color plays a role in how something looks, and with the light and the dark, you get a different dimension to the whole blanket. But yeah, so I'll get that to Bridget by this afternoon.
Oh goodness, doesn't have to be that quick. Bridget is not going to be able to do anything with it today. Maybe next week's newsletter, not this week's. We'll have a reference to at least part of this process, not the finished blanket. And yes, we'll have some info for you so that if it's something you'd like to do, you could get started with it.
Great.
And Jane, I think from a quilting perspective, the log cabin blanket has got a lot of history, hasn't it?
It does. It does. But I'm not very good with history of any sort. So I'm sorry, I can't help there.
No, that's okay. And the other thing that I noticed when I started looking at log cabins online and Googling a little bit is that there are different patterns almost, or structures for how you can put the logs together and use this concept of a log cabin pattern and create different shapes and color combinations and things.
Absolutely, there's a multitude. If you look up, I don't know if many of you look at Pinterest. If you look up log cabins on Pinterest, you will be inundated with ideas and designs and different things that you can do with log cabin.
You might need to specify log cabin knit or log cabin quilt, otherwise I'm quite sure you will see an enormous number of wooden log cabins in forests.
Absolutely.